I'm Chris Altrock. I'm so glad that you're listening to this message. Recently, the New York Times ran on their front page and several pages into the paper the names of 1,000 of the more than 100,000 people who have died in this country from COVID-19. Beside each name, they placed a short obituary, just a few words to describe what that person's life was really all about. And so we had Marie Walker, 99, never drew attention to herself. Mauricio Valdivia, 52, wanted everyone to feel welcome. Robert Dugall, aged 58, advocate for others with disabilities. What if you tragically had made that list? How would you want your life summarized in just a few short words? That's what the author John does for us in his gospel. He summarizes the meaningful life of Jesus in a few short words. John chapter 13, verse 1. Before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. John nears the end of the story of Jesus, and he uses this pregnant phrase, he loved them to the end. And that word translated end is the Greek word telos. And the Greek word telos in this context can refer to three things. All three serve as windows that allow us to better see what Jesus' life was really all about. All three serve as windows that allow us to see what our own lives should really be all about. First, the Greek word telos can refer to time. And so John is saying that Jesus' love had no time limits. He's using it to refer to the duration of Jesus' love. I'm standing right now just outside of a local Walgreens that has shut down. It's one of the countless businesses that just couldn't make a go of it, especially during COVID-19. It's hard to keep things going when you're a business owner. Sometimes business just doesn't last and it has to shut down. And that provides us the opportunity to think about duration and about time, about this Greek word telos. And what John is telling us is that Jesus' love would never shut down. There was never a moment when Jesus' love was not engaged. Jesus loved to the end. He loved at all times. And so we might think of a scene like the one in Mark chapter 1. Jesus has had a long day of ministry, and yet there are still so many people who need his service. And so Mark tells us this in verse 32 of Mark 1. That evening, after sunset, many sick and demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. The whole town gathered at the door to watch. So Jesus healed many people who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons. Now, that's not to say that Jesus did not take care of himself. Just after this, in Mark chapter 1, Jesus gets up early in the morning and he heads out to a solitary place to recharge, to reconnect with his Father. But what Mark is telling us, and what John is telling us, is that for Jesus, love was always on the clock. It was always time to love. And Jesus literally loved until the end, until his dying breath. Even on the cross, Jesus extends love to another man who's been found guilty of a crime, and Jesus offers paradise to him. Even on the cross, Jesus reaches out to John, his disciple, and to his mother, and he urges both of them to care for himself. He loved till the end, until his dying breath. And so you might ask yourself this question: what time am I least likely to love? Because I do believe that there are times in the day. There are times during a week. There are times during a year. There are seasons in our life when we are less likely to love. Some of us might be less likely to love during times of difficulty. Does your love endure when someone becomes hard to love? When a child of yours acts out one too many times? When a spouse of yours makes you angry? When a teacher or a boss wounds you by something they do or say, will your love endure for them? Or does difficulty shorten the duration of your love? Some of us may be less likely to love in times of suffering. You know, when I come across somebody who's suffering, maybe they've lost a loved one, or they've been a victim of racism or sexism, I'm all in. But just really for a few days. I'll text them, I'll call them, I'll write cards to them, but really only for a few days. My love never lasts as long as the suffering of the person I'm trying to love. Time feels like an especially crucial issue for us right now. We have been watching black men and women, from Breonna Taylor to Ahmaud Arbery to Christian Cooper to George Floyd, attacked and murdered. In hundreds of cities for the last several days, we've seen unrest tied to these deaths. And it's got to prompt us to ask ourselves, will our love endure longer than just a few social media posts about it? Longer than just a couple of online discussions about it? Will our love endure until these injustices are resolved? One African American man called me today so distraught. He said, we have done so much civil rights work, and it feels like nothing has changed. And it raises this critical question, will our love endure? Will we keep on loving until these injustices are resolved? Ben Howe, in his book, The Immoral Majority, argues that love does not always follow us into the voting booth. He says that too many times evangelical Christians vote in ways that will just give them power rather than in ways that allow them to express love. Now, you don't have to agree with him, but you should think about his question. Is voting day a time when you continue to love? Jesus loved to the end. His love always endured. No matter the difficulty of the person that he was loving, no matter the circumstance that was making it difficult to love, Jesus kept on loving. He loved until the end. There was nothing like the duration of his grace, his mercy, and compassion. And Jesus calls on us to also love until the end. Second, this word end, or Greek telos, can refer to type. It's not just John's commentary on the duration of Jesus' love. It's his commentary on the degree of Jesus' love. John is saying that Jesus' love not only had no time limits, John is also saying that Jesus' love had no type limits. There were no limits on who Jesus would love. Douglas Webster writes that this Greek word telos, or end, refers to the limitless nature of Jesus' love. After all, just look at the disciples whom he is with when John writes this description about Jesus. Jesus is surrounded by men who were going to betray him, who were going to hand him over, who were going to be silent in the midst of great injustice being done to him. And yet Jesus loved every one of them. He loved to the end. Jesus pushed for this limitless kind of love when he said this in Matthew 5, "You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Religious people in Jesus' day believed that love had limits. Your neighbor, anyone who looked like you, who spoke like you, was to be loved. But everyone else, they were to be hated. In Jesus' day, religion became an excuse and a shield for deciding who you could love and who you were free to loathe. But Jesus modeled a different kind of love. He loved to the end. There were no limits at all on the love of Jesus. And that's what got him into so much trouble. Jesus was always sitting at a table with groups of people who were labeled sinners by the religious elite, and they hated him for that. In the book of John, Jesus is talking to a woman who is a Samaritan. They're at a well, and when people find out, they're shocked about it because of her gender and because of her race. Jesus should never be loving someone like that, they thought. Jesus loved little children, even when his followers were trying to shoo them away. There was no type of person Jesus didn't love. He loved till the end. And this was especially true regarding race. Paul, writing about Jesus, says this in Ephesians 2, "For Christ himself has brought peace to us. He united Jews and Gentiles into one people when in his own body on the cross, he broke down the wall of hostility that separated us." Jesus' love, especially that demonstrated on the cross, was for both Jew and Gentile. Unlike the vast majority of even religious people in his day, Jesus refused to love one race and hate the other. Jesus refused to denigrate one race and lift up the other. There was no type of person Jesus didn't love. And so we might ask ourselves, what type of person am I least likely to love? As you consider the degree and not just the duration of your love, what type of person are you least likely to love? Do you pour out your love generously and abundantly on people who look like you, on people who speak like you, on people who live near you? Or does someone's race, does someone's sexual orientation, does someone's physical or mental capabilities throttle your love? In her true book, The Unwinding of the Miracle, Julie Yip Williams writes about the way in which love was limited in her own culture. Julie was born blind in Vietnam. Her parents lived in deep poverty. And when Julie's grandmother found out about her birth and her disability, she demanded that the parents put her to death. The grandmother arranged a meeting between the parents and an herbalist who could create a mixture that would put Julie to sleep and then cause her to die. And the parents gave in to the wishes of the grandmother. They traveled a long ways to meet the herbalist. But thankfully, he refused to give them the mixture when he learned what that mixture was for. But at that time in that culture, if you were poor, if you were a woman, if you had limited capabilities, say you were blind, you were loved far less. I'm preaching this part of the message just a few hundred yards away from the lynching site of L. Persons. It is one of numerous lynching sites in the Memphis area and across this country. On this site, a few hundred yards from here, L. was chained to a log, doused with gasoline, and burned alive in front of a carnival-like atmosphere of more than 5,000 people present. And the site is a grim reminder of the way in which, in our own country, black men and women have been loved far less than white men and women. And it's not just a thing of the past. The recent deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and others remind us that in this country still, black men and women are loved to a very different degree than white men and women. Now, some of us struggle with this at a very personal level. We don't see ourselves as the type of person whom God would love. We've been rejected far too often. We've been the victim of abuse, of racism, of sexism far too often, and we no longer see ourselves as the type whom Jesus would love. And so we need these words of John telling us that Jesus loved to the end. If you could list every type of person on a sheet of paper, including yourself, you would find that Jesus loved all the way to the end of that list. Jesus loved to the end. And so must we. There's a third meaning to this Greek word telos, or end, in John's Gospel. It not only refers to duration, it not only refers to degree, but it can also refer to destination. And so I'm standing just a few hundred yards away from Interstate 40, where hundreds of trucks and cars are driving to various different destinations. And when we see an interstate like that, it allows us to wonder about our own destination. Paul Tarazi, a Palestinian scholar, says that this Greek word telos in John chapter 13 refers to Jesus' goal, to Jesus' purpose, to the destination he was driving his whole life towards. That is, if you could picture Jesus' life as a map, as a road map, that road had a destination, an endpoint, a terminus. And what was that destination? John is telling us that destination was love. And if anything contributed toward arriving at that destination, Jesus was all in, no matter the cost. And if anything detracted from arriving at that end on his map, then Jesus wanted nothing to do with it, no matter the cost. And that is so important because so many Christians today do not have love as their destination. John Ortberg, in his book Eternity Starts Now, says that for many Christians, the goal, the purpose, the destination is this: getting to the good place. The goal of the Christian faith is simply to get to heaven. And so because of that, certain boundary practices and behaviors like baptism or tithing money or attending church regularly become all important, because that's how we ensure that we're getting to the good place. But because of that destination, many Christians are not as concerned about what's happening on this earth as they should be. Philip Yancey tells of a friend of his who explains it this way: imagine a busload of people who are traveling across the country on their way to the destination of the Grand Canyon. And as they cross the beautiful wheat fields of Kansas, as they cross the beautiful mountains of Colorado, the shades on the windows of their bus are pulled down, because all that matters to them is arriving at their destination. And so they miss all that's happening on the journey to that destination. James Bryan Smith, James K.A. Smith, in his book You Are What You Love, takes this a bit further. I'll put it in my own words. James K.A. Smith says that not only do some Christians envision the end, the goal, the destination, as getting to the good place, they also envision it as learning the good content. So for many Christians, the goal of the Christian faith is simply to learn the good content, the right doctrine, the right theology, the right dogma. And as long as you believe the right things about baptism, about the name of the church, about homosexuality, then you're good. And you're free to dismiss what is happening here on earth. When we adopt destinations like those, getting to the good place only, or learning the good content only, it becomes easier to act in ways that are unloving. I know devout Christians who have that as their destination, and therefore they call the pursuit of racial justice a social issue that has nothing to do with the gospel. I know a man who used to walk out every time I mentioned race in a sermon, because that had nothing to do with the destination of his own life. I remember coming across a Christian in a hallway one Sunday morning, and that person demanded of me, I want you to show me in the Bible where it says we're supposed to serve the poor. The more we adopt those things as our destination, the less loving we are on the way to that destination. But Jesus shows us a different destination. He loved to the end. Radical love was his end. It wasn't about getting to the good place. It wasn't about learning the good content. It was primarily about becoming good people. People who love in the way that Jesus did. Several years ago, there was a flight about ready to take off from the Brazil's Maraba airport. It was headed to Belém, a 48-minute flight away. The captain punched in the directions for the on-board flight computer. Well, he transposed a couple of those numbers, and he entered the wrong destination for the plane to fly to. The plane took off and began heading toward the destination, indicated by the number the captain had mistakenly placed into the system. 48 minutes into the flight, the captain could see no sign of the airport that he thought they were flying to. He began to realize what he had done. When the flight crew began to inquire, he lied to them and said, oh, there's a problem at that airport, and so I'm flying to a different airport. He told the crew to give the passengers more alcohol to drink. A little bit later, the first officer pressed him, and the captain dismissed him. An hour later, completely lost, the captain and the plane ran out of fuel and crash landed in the Amazon jungle, 700 miles away from their intended destination. 13 people perished in the crash. When we have the wrong destination, the results are perilous, not only to ourselves, but to the people around us. Jesus loved to the end. Love was his end, his goal, his destination, and as a result, the entire human race was blessed. May we and our world be blessed as we set aside all other ends and make love the end of our lives.